They say memory is the first thing to go when something wants to be forgotten. But the land remembers. The trees of Briar Hollow still lean eastward like they're straining to flee the place where the school once stood. There are no ruins now, just a clearing surrounded by old pines and the faint outline of a foundation that never should have been laid. But in the spring of 1858, when the schoolhouse opened its doors to the children of Briar Hollow, no one in the town could have guessed they would never see those doors open again. The strangest thing wasn't what happened inside. It was that the building had no exit doors, at least none that anyone could recall seeing after that first day. Parents left their children at the threshold each morning. The large iron doors swung shut with a sound like a closing crypt, and that was it. No ringing bell, no dismissal hour, no children walking home, dusty from play or grinning from lessons well learned. Only silence. And yet, no one asked why. Not at first. The man who ran it, Headmaster Royce Dillard, arrived in the winter of 1857 without fanfare. He came with 3 carts, a red-roofed wagon, and papers bearing the governor's seal authorizing the establishment of a private academy on Hollow Hill Road. He was a tall man with a priest's manner and a stonemason's hands, cords of strength hidden under velvet sleeves. His voice was soft and measured. He never raised it, but when he spoke, even the blackbirds stopped to listen. He lived on the school grounds in a house built of the same gray stone as the school itself. Briar Hollow had never had a formal school. Children were taught at home by family or neighbors, or not at all. So when Dillard offered a curriculum, discipline, and a future, free of charge, the town council approved without hesitation. The school was built within months. No one remembered seeing builders, only that it seemed to rise overnight, stone by stone, window by window. Some said they heard chanting at night during construction. Others dismissed it as wind through the hollows. On the first day, 32 children stepped through the doors. Teacher Anna Kern, a young woman from Asheville with bright copper hair and a laugh that soothed even the shyest child, was hired to assist. She had come highly recommended, and after a brief interview with Dillard, she accepted the post. She was the last adult to enter the building and return, at least for a time. That first week, parents waited outside at dusk, expecting their children. But no bell rang. No children emerged. Eventually, Dillard appeared, bowed politely, and explained. The children are being prepared. Their studies will continue until their minds are freed from distraction. They will be released when they are ready. The parents nodded, not out of understanding, but out of some strange compulsion, as if Dillard's words dulled their concern, as if forgetting was the natural order of things. Within days, it became routine. Children went in. No one came out, no one questioned it, not publicly, until one boy, a wiry, sharp-eyed 10-year-old named Malcolm Lee, sent a note. It came in the mouth of a dead crow. Anna Kern, pale and trembling, had found the bird lying on her desk before morning lessons. Its beak was sealed with thread. Inside was a paper scrap folded 6 times and smeared with ink. "They teach us how to leave our skin," the note read, "but they won't let us take it with us." The ink had soaked through the paper like blood. Kern folded it again, pressed it into her apron pocket, and never spoke of it. But that was the first crack in the illusion, the first breath of rot beneath the stone. She burned the note that night but kept the thread, and from that day forward, she began counting the children during morning prayers. There were no longer 32, there were 31. The headmaster never said a word, and she never asked. But she began sleeping with a lantern lit, even in daylight. Even in daylight, Anna Kern began to fear shadows that didn't move the way they should. The sun shone freely on the hill, but inside the schoolhouse, it never reached the back of the room. There, behind the last row of desks, the light seemed to dim as if something ancient breathed against it. She never told anyone, but the blackboard sometimes wiped itself clean when her back was turned. Once, She found a drawing she hadn't written, a stick-figure child with no face, arms extended as if pleading or warning. Each morning, the iron doors creaked open to let her in. Dillard would be waiting in the vestibule, always with the same solemn nod and the same phrase. Knowledge begins with silence. She never saw him eat, never saw him leave. His quarters, rumored to be underground, were locked with a ring of iron keys that hung from his belt like a chain. No one else carried any, even Anna. The students rarely spoke. When they did, their words sounded rehearsed, too precise, too perfect, like they weren't merely repeating facts, but reciting memories that didn't belong to them. Anna tried once, just once, to ask Malcolm about the note. It was during lunch, beneath the chapel mural depicting the Tree of Wisdom, a massive oak painted in golds and blacks. He met her eyes. "We weren't supposed to remember," he whispered. But the crow had a hole in its throat. "I climbed through it." She said nothing. She never brought it up again. But after that day, she noticed him shrinking, physically. His clothes no longer fit. His fingers were too long for his sleeves. His spine curled inward like something was pulling him from behind. She tried to record it in her lesson journal. The next day, the entry had vanished. The page was blank, save for one unfamiliar sentence written in red ink. "The body is the first lie a child must unlearn." By mid-October, 2 more children were missing. The parents did not protest. In town, they spoke of the school with glassy pride. "Our boy's reading Latin," one father boasted at the post office. Only 8 years old. A mother claimed her daughter could recite the entire book of Revelation without blinking. No one asked why the children never came home. It was as if the entire town had agreed to forget, but the land remembered. Each time a child disappeared, a tree near the school would blacken. Not rot, just darken, like it had been charred from within. The bark would turn to ash, but the tree remained standing, unburned, yet no longer alive. Anna marked the 3rd such tree in her notebook and carved a symbol into its trunk, an old Appalachian ward against lost souls. The next morning, the tree was gone. Only a ring of dust remained, and her carving was etched instead on the wooden beam above the classroom door. It was then that Anna began keeping her thoughts on parchment hidden in the heel of her boot. She no longer trusted her desk. One evening, she returned from the dining hall to find all her drawers rearranged in perfect mirrored order. Not missing, just reversed. Even her nameplate on the door now read Nrek Anna. She laughed quietly, then wept in her bed until the moon passed. Headmaster Dillard, meanwhile, remained unchanged. He gave lectures on ancient linguistics and moral geometry, his voice like oil sliding over a blade. During one lesson, he unrolled a scroll said to be from Carthage and asked the students to transcribe it. Malcolm bled from the nose halfway through. Dillard smiled and whispered, "The truth draws itself in blood." One Sunday morning, Anna found her own handwriting on the blackboard, though she hadn't written a word. It said, "On the 30th day, I will follow him into the cellar." She didn't remember writing it, but she circled the number in her secret journal anyway. 30. That was only 12 days away, and that night the sound came again. The dragging, wet breath beneath the floorboards. Anna froze in her bed, every candle extinguished though she hadn't touched them. Only the faint glow of moonlight through the high windows gave shape to the dormitory walls. She held her breath, listening. A low scrape followed, like damp skin pulled across old wood, slow and deliberate, moving just beneath the room. Then silence. Then the faintest whisper, not in any language she knew. She did not sleep. In the morning, the marks were back, small handprints but longer than any child's, etched in soot along the hallway wall. They led from the classroom to the trap door that Dillard kept bolted beneath the lectern. Anna had never seen him open it, but she'd heard rumors from the children, always spoken in fragments. The hollow stairs, no echoes, where the glass eyes sleep. That day marked the 23rd. 7 days until the 30th. Malcolm was no longer speaking at all. His mouth moved when addressed, but no sound emerged. Anna noticed his eyes seemed coated in something filmy, as though they no longer reflected light. He still sat in his chair, still wrote his lessons, but the writing was now in spirals. Not English, not Latin, but tight coils of letters layered on top of each other until the ink bled through the page. When Anna tried to stop him, he grabbed her wrist with unnatural strength and whispered, "If we don't go down, we go in." "What does that mean?" she asked, but he only smiled, a wide, dry stretch of lips with no warmth behind it. Later, she brought her concerns to Dillard. She found him in the library, seated before a massive ledger bound in cracked leather. The pages within were not words but symbols. Some she recognized from her studies in folklore, others she had only seen in the margins of forbidden texts. Dillard closed the book slowly. "Miss Kern," he said, "you've done admirable work, but you are not yet ready to understand the curriculum in full." She wanted to protest, to scream, but she only nodded. Her voice caught in her throat like a bird that had flown into a closed window. That evening, Anna returned to her quarters to find her journal missing. Only the boots remained, empty, heels cut open, the parchment removed. In their place was a single pine needle laid across her pillow. Nothing more. But that night, her dreams were not her own. She wandered endless corridors lined with mirrors, but the reflections did not show her. They showed the children, or rather, what remained of them. Bent, flickering shapes, their faces stretched into masks of serene understanding. They pressed their palms to the glass, and behind each one stood Dillard, smiling, silent, holding a string that passed through their spines like puppet cords. When she woke, the number 6 had been scratched into her window pane. 6 days. The next morning, Anna did not teach. She wandered the grounds, watching. Parents still came with bright eyes and hopeful smiles, handing over their children like lambs. She stood by the door as they entered, 26 now, and said nothing. No one noticed her trembling. No one saw her slip a stone beneath the classroom floorboards, marking the spot with a chalk X. It was the only place where the breathing had been loudest. That night, she returned, with a hammer. She waited until the hall was empty, the iron doors bolted, the candles snuffed by unseen hands. She knelt on the cold planks, heart racing, and pried up the board. Beneath, only darkness, a hole that dropped farther than any foundation should reach. She lowered a candle inside. The flame flickered, then snuffed, without smoke, without wind. But before the light vanished, she saw them. Eyes, not one pair, dozens, and all of them were blinking in unison. Anna dropped the candle, recoiling so violently that she struck her head on the corner of the teacher's desk. The darkness swallowed the flame completely. The hole remained open, yawning like a wound in the floor, and from its throat rose a slow exhale, warm and sweet, like milk gone sour. Her vision blurred, but she scrambled backward across the floor, slamming the board shut with a sharp crack. She drove the nails back in with trembling hands, each strike of the hammer echoing like a bell tolling underwater. For the rest of the night, she sat pressed against the far wall, clutching the hammer in both hands. She whispered to herself. Psalms, half-forgotten lullabies. Her mother's name. Anything to keep her mind from following what she had seen, or thought she had seen, into the dark. The silence afterward was worse than the breathing. It felt like being watched by something that didn't blink anymore because it no longer needed to. When morning came, she didn't wait for Dillard. She walked out of the classroom before prayers, down the stone corridor that led to the chapel, and into the vestibule where the children hung their coats. She searched every garment, every pocket, every hem. No notes, no signs, until she reached Malcolm's. A small tear behind the collar held a folded slip of paper. She opened it with shaking fingers. 4th stair, right side, carved door. If you're not alone, don't knock. The paper was damp with something that smelled of salt and copper. She didn't care. She tucked it into her sleeve and waited for nightfall again. The 30th was only 4 days away. At dinner, Dillard announced that the curriculum was entering its final phase. The children would no longer be attending regular lessons. Contemplation will replace repetition, he said calmly. What has been planted must now be still, so that it may bloom in silence. Anna forced herself to meet his gaze. His eyes were darker than she remembered. Not in color, but in depth, like the pupils reached farther inward than human anatomy allowed. They reminded her of wells left uncovered in the woods, still, deep and waiting. That night, she returned to the classroom alone. She brought no candle this time, no hammer, only the letter from Malcolm and a piece of twine from her sewing kit. She slipped off her shoes and stepped barefoot across the creaking floor, her breath held tight inside her ribs. She peeled the board back again. The hole was waiting. She lowered her body slowly, legs first, until she found the top step. Stone. Cold. Moist. The 4th stair was smoother than the others, worn not by water or erosion, but by passing hands. She crouched, feeling the wall to her right. Her fingertips touched wood, a small door, rounded at the top, as if it had once belonged in a cathedral. She pressed her ear against it. Silence. No breathing, no voices. She was not sure if she was alone. She raised her hand to knock, but something touched her from behind. It was not rough or sudden. It was soft, gentle, like a child's hand resting on her shoulder. She did not turn. She could not. Her limbs locked as if her bones had remembered fear in a way her mind had not. The hand lingered, then withdrew. Her breathing returned. She knocked twice. The door opened inward. Beyond was not a room, but a path, a narrow tunnel descending into flickering light. The walls pulsed faintly, as if alive. She stepped forward, heart stammering, and the door sealed shut behind her without sound. The hallway narrowed as she moved. A hum grew louder, not mechanical, but vocal, like dozens of voices humming in harmony just beneath human pitch. The floor sloped downward in perfect geometry. At the end of the corridor, she found a mirror, and in the mirror was not her reflection, but a child, smiling, and he was mouthing her name. Anna stared, unable to blink. The boy in the mirror bore Malcolm's features, but his eyes were entirely black, not with malice, but with something far worse. Recognition. He mouthed the name again. Anna. But this time, the sound arrived a heartbeat later, as if spoken from the back of her own throat. She took a step backward, but the tunnel behind her had changed. Where the wooden door had been, now stood only smooth stone, unbroken. There was no exit. The mirror shimmered slightly, its surface warping like water disturbed by breath. She reached toward it, and her hand passed through. Not into glass. Into air, cold and thick, as if her fingers entered a lung that had never exhaled. She stepped in. On the other side, she found herself in a room shaped like a bell, smooth stone walls curving above her like an upside-down chalice. The ceiling pulsed faintly, alive with veins of gold light, and in the center stood a podium, circular, carved from bone-white stone. Upon it sat an open book, but it was no book, not truly. Its pages pulsed, too, flesh-like, stitched into a spine of coiled iron and sinew. Words bloomed across its surface in red ink that moved like mercury, rearranging themselves as she approached. She could read none of it. Behind her, a voice spoke, not loudly, but with absolute clarity. "You are not meant to follow." She turned. Royce Dillard stood at the edge of the chamber, hands clasped, expression unreadable. His velvet coat was gone. He wore a simple robe now, the fabric stitched with the same curling sigils that adorned the book. They moved across the cloth like serpents. He stepped forward without sound. "You left your place, Miss Kern," he continued, "but not your purpose." She backed away, hand trembling toward the book. "What are you doing to them?" "To them." Dillard tilted his head. "They are not being punished. They are being prepared." "For what?" Her voice cracked. He smiled, not cruelly, but sadly. "For freedom." From behind him, the children entered. They did not walk. They glided. Their feet did not lift, but skimmed the surface like water insects. 30 shapes, thin and pale, their eyes black as obsidian and mouths stitched shut with crimson thread. Malcolm stood among them. He was smiling. "They have been emptied," Dillard said. "Of fear, of pain, of memory. Soon they will be vessels." "For what?" Anna asked again, but she already knew. The book turned a page on its own. The characters reshaped. The room grew colder. "There is knowledge," Dillard said, "that predates language. There are thoughts that need minds free of contradiction. The children are not lost. They are made ready." Anna stepped toward the book, driven by something she couldn't name. The moment her hand touched the page, a sound burst through her like thunder underwater. Not heard, but remembered. Her vision whitened. Her mouth opened, and she screamed. But not in her own voice. The sound came in chords, in harmony, and the children answered, not with words, but with tone. A resonance filled the chamber, vibrating through her bones. She felt her name sliding from her, letter by letter, until she couldn't recall how it had ever been spelled. Dillard approached. He placed his palm on her forehead. "You still carry weight," he whispered, "but not for long." Anna collapsed, and when her eyes opened again, the children were gone. So was Dillard. So was the room. She was lying in the classroom, sunlight bleeding through the east windows. The trap door was sealed. The children sat at their desks, perfectly still. But there were 32 now, and one of them had her face. Anna couldn't move. She sat at her own desk, back straight, hands folded neatly before her, watching the imposter through eyes that didn't seem entirely her own. The child in her seat was motionless, expressionless, but when she turned her head, only slightly, Anna felt a pressure inside her skull, like something shifting behind her eyes. The others remained quiet, breathing in unison. The room pulsed with stillness, but not peace. It was more like the hush before a collapse, a suspended moment before gravity remembered its duty, and then the bell rang. It had never rung before. The iron sound reverberated through the building like a sentence passed. The children stood in perfect rhythm, chairs scraping in sync. Anna rose too, unwillingly, her muscles answering not to thought, but to ritual. The procession began without command. They filed out of the classroom into the stone corridor, past the chapel, and toward the door that had once held no key. Today, it opened. Sunlight struck her face, sudden and sharp, like the slap of cold water. Outside, the parents waited, smiling, chatting, arms open for embraces that would never come. Each child walked silently into those waiting arms. The parents did not question their silence. They seemed not to notice the blankness behind their children's smiles. Only Anna stood still at the threshold. Dillard appeared beside her. "Return to your room, Miss Kern," he said gently. "You've completed your part." "But she began. But the words tangled. He turned to her with that same quiet sadness. You made a choice. You crossed the mirror. Behind her, she heard a voice speak with her exact cadence. We are whole now. She turned. The child, her duplicate, smiled. The corners of its mouth twitched with practiced warmth, and its eyes blinked with timing too perfect to be natural. Anna staggered backward, heart pounding, breath coming fast. She clutched the door frame for balance. The classroom, the corridor, the children, all normal, all unchanged. But something was gone, not taken, traded. She fled. Out the door, into the woods, beyond the pines of Briar Hollow. The branches clawed her cheeks, thorns ripped her dress, but she did not stop until the school was lost behind the trees. She collapsed by a creek, soaked and shaking. Her hands were not hers. Her breath steamed unnaturally in the air. That night, she returned to town. The streets were alive with celebration. Families lit lanterns for the day of completion, a tradition Anna had never heard of. They spoke of it as though it had always existed. Bunting hung from windows. Cakes were cut. No one noticed the pale woman with tangled hair watching from the alley. She saw Malcolm's parents hugging something that wore their son's face. And she saw him, just for a moment, standing across the square, behind the church. Not moving. Watching her, the real Malcolm. Skin grayed, eyes distant, mouth stitched shut. And then he vanished. Anna broke into the chapel that night. She pried up the floorboards beneath the pulpit. Her fingers bled against the nails. Beneath the boards, she found a box wrapped in red linen. Inside were items that did not belong in any church. A mirror framed in bone, a child's molar with script carved into its root, a book of hymns rewritten with numbers. The last item was a letter, not addressed to her, but to Dillard. Dated years before the school was ever built. We have located the vessel site, it read. Construction must begin before the eclipse. The mines must be emptied by December, all 32. One must be willing. She read it twice. Then she understood. She had not interrupted the ritual. She had fulfilled it. The 30th had not marked the ending. It was the beginning, and across the clearing, beneath the rising moon, the school bell rang once more. But this time, it echoed in reverse. The sound did not carry upward. It sank. Into the soil, into the creek beds, into the roots of trees that had not bloomed since spring. Anna felt it reverberate through her spine like a name she hadn't spoken since childhood. Around her, the wind shifted, and every candle in town guttered at once. From the church steeple to the smallest hearth, the light died. The celebration ended mid-song, and no one screamed. They simply stopped, stood still, and turned. One by one, every face turned toward the school. Anna dropped the letter. Her hands trembled as if something inside the paper had bit her. She backed out of the chapel, her boots leaving dark impressions in the frost-slick grass. Her eyes remained locked on the horizon, where the silhouette of the school pulsed faintly, not with light, but with movement, like it was breathing. A mist began to rise, thick and low. Not natural fog. It rolled out in deliberate waves, pushing past the town limits like a tide coming home. From its depths came faint whispers, syllables without grammar, fragments of something older than speech. She covered her ears. It made no difference. The words were inside her now. Anna ran. She reached the edge of Briar Hollow by dawn, where the roads forked toward Asheville or nowhere. Her legs burned, her lungs cracked, but she did not stop. She collapsed at the farm of an old woman named May Culler, who took one look at her and said, "Child, you've seen the inside." May had lived in those woods all her life. She remembered when the land where the school now stood was a pine grove known for bleeding sap even in winter. "My great-grandfather said the trees were planted over a burial mound," she told Anna. "Not human dead. Something older, something sealed." Anna didn't argue. May fed her, clothed her, and let her sleep in the barn loft. For a week, Anna said nothing. She lay awake each night listening for sounds on the wind. Sometimes she heard music, wrong music, composed of tones that made her teeth ache. Other times, she dreamed of the classroom, not as it had been, but as it had become, a cathedral of bones where children floated instead of sat, their mouths open, pouring ink instead of breath. On the 8th night, May handed her a journal. "I found this behind the walls years ago," she said. Didn't know what it was till now. The leather was cracked, the pages brittle. Inside, Anna found drawings, maps of underground tunnels, anatomical diagrams of children with symbols instead of organs, and a language she recognized but could not read. At the back was a single entry in English. To unseal the vessel, one must remember the forgetting. Beneath it, a name. Anna Kern. It was dated 6 months before her own birth. Her hands went numb. How could her name be here? How could it predate her? May only nodded. "You think time runs straight," she said. "But some things, some places, they eat time like roots eat soil. You stepped into it. That school isn't just a building. It's a door." Anna didn't sleep that night. She rose before dawn and walked back toward Briar Hollow. The mist was gone. The town stood still. But the school, its windows were dark, its walls silent, as if it had never been anything more than stone and timber. A hollow place waiting to be filled, and on the door hung a sign. "Now enrolling," in her own handwriting. Anna stood in front of the school, staring at the faded ink, the letters curved in her unmistakable penmanship. Looped G, hard-angled R. But she had never written it, at least not here. Not now. She reached for the parchment and felt the paper crumble under her fingers, disintegrating into ash that vanished before it could touch the ground. The school was quiet, the kind of quiet that screams beneath the skin. No sound from within, no footsteps, no breath. The iron doors were ajar, just barely. And inside, darkness waited with the patience of stone. She should have turned away. She knew that, but something pulled her, subtle, ancient, a memory she did not own. She stepped inside. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the air changed. It thickened, grew warmer. The stone walls no longer smelled of chalk or candle wax. Now they reeked of something sweet and coppery, as if flowers had been fed blood and left to rot. She passed the classroom. It was empty, desks perfectly arranged, the blackboard blank, yet faint whispers circled the room like echoes without origin. She did not linger. Instead, she went toward the chapel. The door creaked open just as before. The pews were gone. In their place stood tall mirrors, each framed in twisted metal and bone. 32 of them, lining the walls like sentinels. Each mirror held a different scene. Children she did not know but somehow recognized, playing, crying, whispering in languages not taught in any book. And at the far end of the room stood the final mirror. Larger, cracked, and within it, a version of herself. But older. Eyes hollow, skin pale. Mouth sewn shut. The stitched reflection raised a hand and pressed it to the glass. Anna did not move. Her hand twitched, but she held it down. The reflection smiled slightly, then turned and walked out of view. Something cold brushed her spine. Behind her, a voice spoke. "You were never meant to be outside." She turned. Royce Dillard stood in the aisle, robes darker than ever, face thinner now, stretched like wax over bone, but the eyes remained unchanged, deep, still, knowing he didn't blink. "You took what was not yet given," he said. "You broke the cycle too soon." Anna backed away, words fumbling in her throat. "What cycle? Why me?" He tilted his head, like one examining an insect caught in amber. Because your soul was borrowed. Not born, you are the 33rd. She froze. No child in Briar Hollow ever bore your name until the day the school was built, Dillard continued. No record, no parent, no bloodline. You appeared. Just as planned, just as drawn. He extended his hand toward the cracked mirror. Finish it. The mirror pulsed. Anna shook her head. No, I won't be part of this. He lowered his hand, expression unreadable. You already are. The chapel trembled. A low hum began, like a chorus buried beneath the earth. The mirrors shimmered. From each one, the children began to step out, one by one. Some wept, some laughed. All were silent in their movements. They surrounded her slowly, gently, like waves returning to a shoreline they'd never left. Among them, she saw Malcolm. His eyes were clear again. No black, just sorrow. He reached for her. I'm sorry, he whispered. It needs a teacher. Anna stumbled back, heart cracking open with the truth. This wasn't about knowledge. It never had been. It was about memory, about containment, about becoming the vessel that binds them all, and she was already half-formed. The last thing she heard before the mirrors swallowed the light was her own voice, from somewhere she had never been. It wasn't an echo. It was a memory, but not hers. It said, "We never leave, we become." Then silence. Anna awoke on the chapel floor, arms crossed over her chest like a corpse prepared for burial. The room was dim, flickering with a gray light that came from nowhere and cast no shadows. The mirrors were gone. Dillard was gone. The children, gone. Only the cracked mirror remained, now blackened and cold, its surface still rippling faintly like disturbed water. But something had changed inside her. The air felt heavier in her lungs. Her limbs responded slower, like her body was no longer a single self, but a collection of borrowed wills stitched together. Her thoughts were fractured, memories interlaced with unfamiliar faces. She saw herself through Malcolm's eyes, through Anna Kern's eyes, through someone else's eyes entirely. She wasn't just remembering, she was remembering others. And then, buried in that psychic collage, came the voice of May Kula. But it was younger, confident. It spoke in crisp diction, journalistic, recorded on paper once meant for courtrooms. The girl arrived in 1834, unnamed, underweight, and alone. May's voice said. No town claimed her. No records. She stayed with the church until her 10th birthday, then vanished the same day the school plans were signed. Anna staggered to her feet. 34. That was 24 years ago, long before she believed she had been born. She ran, back into the hallway, down the corridor, past the classroom, still neat, still waiting. She pushed through the vestibule, into the cold. Outside, dawn had just broken. Fog drifted lazily along the treetops, and the bells of the town church rang out as if in celebration. But something was wrong with the sound. Each chime hit out of sequence. 12, then 2, then 6, then 12 again. The rhythm was palindromic, mirrored, just like the school. Anna made for the town archives. If the date was true, if someone else had known of her before she was born, it would be there, buried in ink and dust. She broke in through a side window. The building was empty. Time inside felt suspended, as if the clocks refused to tick unless watched. She searched for hours. Census records, baptism rolls, school registers. Her fingers bled from page turns. And then she found it. A letter dated April 1834, addressed to a man named Jonathan Kern. It read, "The girl has arrived. She bears no name, but she bears the mark. Her dreams align with the mirror. Keep her close. When the bell tolls in reverse, she must return." Attached was a sketch of her face, not as an adult, but as a child. Anna dropped the letter, bile rising in her throat. She clutched the edge of the desk, trembling. She had never escaped, because she had never come from outside, and everything she'd remembered, her schooling, her employment, even May, were echoes. Rewritten pages in a book that had turned itself too many times. She was the 33rd, not just in number, but in cycle. She hadn't entered the school. She had emerged from it. As the fog thickened outside, she realized the truth. The school had always been feeding, not teaching. It consumed time, people, memory, and when it had too much, it birthed what it needed. And now it needed her again. She stumbled out into the street, hoping for faces, for resistance, for anyone. But the town was different, not empty, not gone. Reversed, shops were mirrored, letters backward, the sun rising in the west, and walking toward her, slowly, silently, were 32 children, each holding a mirror, each showing a different version of her face. They did not blink, did not speak, just moved with perfect symmetry, as if choreographed by something watching from a height far beyond the clouds. Each mirror reflected her, not as she was now, but as she had been or might become. A child weeping in a burning chapel, an old woman rotting in a chair, a priestess with stitched lips, a corpse in a cradle. And one, just one, showed her, smiling with Dillard's eyes. Anna stepped back. The children didn't follow. They simply stopped, forming a ring around her in the middle of Briar Hollow. The fog congealed at their feet. The church bell rang once more, that same reversed chime, now growing louder, too loud for its size, echoing with impossible resonance. She clutched her ears and dropped to her knees. The mirrors began to hum, the air split like silk being torn down the middle. And then, silence. A single mirror dropped from a child's hand and shattered on the ground. Anna looked up. The fog cleared for just a second, revealing the school in the distance, but it was no longer the modest stone building she remembered. It had grown, expanded. Its spire now pierced the clouds, and its windows glowed with a dull, marrow-colored light. Vines of bone and ink twisted up its walls like veins seeking breath, and surrounding it were statues. 32 child-sized figures in kneeling positions, heads bowed in permanent prayer. Her legs moved on their own. She walked through the center of town, across the threshold of forest, back toward that impossible place. The path had changed. What once was Forest Trail now resembled a nave, rows of wooden figures on either side shaped like townspeople, mouths agape in songless chorus. They didn't move, but she could feel them watching, judging. By the time she reached the front steps, the doors opened before her, and inside, Royce Dillard was waiting. He stood beneath the Tree of Wisdom mural in the chapel, arms spread in welcome, eyes aglow with a heatless fire. "You've remembered," he said softly. Anna didn't speak. He stepped closer. "You were never the witness, Anna. You were the record. You were the book that forgot it was being written." She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her voice was gone again, taken by the mirrors, or maybe never hers at all. Dillard raised one hand. The children entered behind him, 32 in a line, mirrors gone, faces blank once more. Malcolm at the front, they circled her again. "You are the hinge," Dillard said. "The fold between before and again. The school does not exist without you. You are its door." And then he reached into his robe and drew forth something she hadn't seen in weeks. Her old journal, the one she had hidden in her boot. Its cover was cracked, soaked in what looked like ink and ash. He handed it to her. It was open, and the last entry read, "I will return, I will remember, I will teach." Signed, Anna Kern, but not in her handwriting, in a script ancient, looped, and final. She looked up, and Dillard was gone. So were the children. So was the room. She stood alone in the middle of the town square again, but now the sky above her pulsed with inverted stars, and somewhere inside her mind, a bell rang once, and a door began to open inward. Not a physical door, but one formed of thought and marrow. Its hinges creaked not in the air, but through her bones. As it opened, Anna felt pieces of herself fall away, memories once vivid now turning soft at the edges, like paper submerged in oil. Her mother's voice dissolved first, then the scent of the orchard behind her childhood home, then the way light used to feel on her skin. In their place came new images, truer ones, or perhaps older. She saw the first version of the school, not as stone, but as flesh. A living structure coiled like a snail shell, its corridors pulsing, its walls breathing. Inside were children of no nation, no name, just numbers, each face marked by ash, each mouth open in eternal gasp. And at the center, seated upon a throne of rib and wood, was a woman with Anna's face and no eyes. The vision receded like tide pulling from shore. Anna was still in the town square, but it no longer resembled Briar Hollow. The building stood mirror flat, reflections upon water, fragile and false. The sun didn't rise. It hovered like a pinned coin. No wind stirred. The people were mannequins now, turned toward her, waiting. They were all children. 32 again. Only this time, they were adults trapped in child bodies. Teachers, priests, butchers, seamstresses. Each one had been here before. Each one had been Anna once. She opened her journal again. A new page had appeared, not written, etched, carved into the paper with something sharper than a pen. If you cannot escape the school, become it. She dropped the book. The bell rang again. This time, she felt it in her teeth. From the edge of the square, the school materialized. Not stone anymore, but something older. Bone and wood and story. The door swung open, not from within, but as though pushed by breath, and standing there once more was Dillard, though his form now flickered. Man, beast, teacher, echo. His voice echoed in her skull, though his mouth did not move. "You've almost remembered." She took one step toward him, and then another. The townspeople children began to follow, forming a solemn line behind her, each face blank, each body pulled by invisible thread. The path to the school twisted beneath their feet, stone folding in spirals, grass curling like ink in water. Every step they took brought Anna closer to something she had once sealed. At the threshold, she stopped. Inside, the chapel waited, but it was no longer mirrors. It was filled with desks, hundreds of them, arranged in concentric circles around a central altar. On it sat the Book of Veins, its pages open, pulsing, and next to it, Malcolm stood, holding a silver bell in his hand. He looked older, sadder, but he nodded once as if in apology. "I tried to keep you out," he said. Anna looked at him. "What am I?" she asked. Malcolm's lip trembled. "You're the ink that remembers." And then one of the townspeople collapsed behind her, then another, and another. Each body dissolved into dust, which rose into the air and drifted toward the altar, swirling around Anna's feet. She looked at her hands. They were glowing from within, veins etched in script. The 33rd was not a number, it was the key. The chapel door closed behind her without touch, and the walls began to breathe. They expanded with a slow inhale, then contracted with a sigh so deep it rattled the glassless windows. The stone under her feet pulsed faintly, like skin stretched over something vast and restless. Anna stood at the altar, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the Book of Veins. It was open now, not to words, but to something deeper. Rows of symbols, shaped like mouths, mid-scream, each etched in shimmering black ink that bled as she watched. Malcolm stood beside her, but he did not speak again. The children who had followed her, the former townspeople, now formed a circle around the room. They were changing. Their bodies grew translucent, dissolving into filaments of light that spiraled slowly toward the book, merging with its spine, its pages, its purpose. And all the while, the building exhaled in rhythm. Anna closed her eyes. She saw through the breath. The school was not a school. It never had been. It was a memory engine, an ancient structure built not to teach, but to bind, not to house minds, but to trap them in a cycle of forgetting and reformation. Every 32nd child emptied themselves, and the 33rd, always her, recorded the forgetting. Rewrote the order, became the ledger. And now it was time to inscribe again. Her hands moved without command. She reached for the book. The ink recognized her. It rose up from the page like liquid summoned by oath, coiling around her wrists, her arms, her throat. The altar split open, revealing a well of pure shadow beneath. A vortex not of darkness, but of unformed memory. Dillard's voice returned, not aloud, but inside her skin. "You are the teacher now." With those words, the final seal broke. The room collapsed inward, not with destruction, but with merging. The walls folded like paper. The altar unspooled into a staircase that led downward, spiraling into the root of the school. Its true heart. The light from above disappeared, replaced by a low, pulsing glow that came from within the stone itself. She descended. Each step took her through layers of time. She passed versions of herself frozen mid-lesson, some ancient, some unborn. One wept, one laughed, one held a knife, one held a child. All were Anna. At the base of the staircase was a chamber, round, silent, warm. In its center was a cradle. Inside it, a book made of skin, inked with the alphabet of the dead, and next to it, a quill formed from a single silver hair, her own. She stepped forward. The book opened itself, blank, waiting. Anna sat on the floor and lifted the quill. Memories poured in. Not hers alone, but all 32, across all versions, across all cycles, every scream, every lesson, every betrayal. She remembered being Dillard. She remembered being Malcolm. She remembered being the child with her face and the teacher who had tried to run. She wrote. The ink didn't stain. It seared. Each letter carved into the living page became part of the new order. A new configuration. The school's shape began to change. Shifting above her, walls reformed. Windows moved. Corridors bent inward like closed eyes. She wrote until her fingers cracked open, and as she penned the final line, the quill dissolved in her hand. The cradle closed, and the stairs disappeared. There was no exit, only silence. Anna lay back on the warm stone floor, and above her, the children began to sing, 32 voices in perfect harmony, echoing through the hollow bones of the world, and the school, alive again, took its first breath in a new cycle. Outside, Briar Hollow had changed, but no one knew it. The townspeople awoke with smiles stitched gently into their routines, their memories revised, their histories cleaned of all contradiction. The streets bore the same names, the buildings stood where they always had, but the foundation beneath them pulsed now with something older than rock. Anna Kern no longer existed in the census. In her place was a new figure, Miss Adeline Kesh, head mistress of Briar Hollow School for the Advancement of Youth. She appeared on parchment, in speech, in memory, as though she had always been there. Her eyes matched Anna's, but her smile never broke. And deep below the school, the cradle rocked gently. The Book of Veins remained sealed, for now. The 32 had been reborn again, children of good homes, promising minds, pure potential. Malcolm Lee had returned too, his name now Matthew Lyle. A different boy, but with the same eyes. Somewhere, behind them, a spark of recognition lingered like the smell of smoke after a fire. Classes began anew. Miss Kesh greeted each child with warmth, precision, and a faint lilt that made every word feel remembered before it was spoken. The school bell no longer rang in reverse, but in rhythm. Only once, each morning, just enough to open the gate, and each child, without knowing, walked through it. But something, deep in the foundations, had shifted. One child did not forget. Her name was Florence Guide. She was 9 years old. Sharp but quiet, a lover of riddles and ciphers. She sat always in the far left desk, near the east window where the sunlight hit longest, and by her second week, she had begun to draw symbols she'd never been taught, marks that bent like ink under pressure, just like the ones etched into the old altar stone. She didn't sleep much. She told her mother it was because the school talks in its dreams. Her mother laughed. Miss Kesh did not. Each day, Florence came earlier. Each day, she asked more questions, and one day, she found the mirror. It was small, no taller than her shin, wedged behind the baseboard beneath her desk, cracked once diagonally. Its frame was simple oak, worn by age. When she looked into it, she didn't see herself. She saw Anna, alive, blinking and mouthing her name. Florence dropped the mirror. It didn't shatter. It vanished before it hit the ground. She turned, expecting a reprimand, expecting a trick. Miss Kesh stood at the door. "You saw it," she said, but her tone was neither angry nor surprised. Florence hesitated. "Is it bad?" Miss Kesh knelt beside her. "No," she whispered. "It's necessary." And for the first time in weeks, her smile cracked. Not into a grin, but into grief. Florence watched her, studied her face. "You were her," she said. Miss Kesh nodded. Slowly, Florence narrowed her eyes. "But you didn't stop it." There was no answer for a moment. Then, "I couldn't. I was the ending. You might be the breach." Florence tilted her head. "What's a breach?" "It's a door that opens both ways." And then, for the briefest of seconds, something flickered in Miss Kesh's eyes. Something soft and terrified, and not entirely human. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to warn or weep or pray. But the school bell rang. The sound echoed strangely that morning, not in reverse, but in layers, and Florence heard something inside the chime, something hidden between the vibrations, like a voice behind the voice. It wasn't speaking yet, but it was listening. She said nothing to the others, not to her parents, not to her classmates. She simply kept drawing the symbols, not on paper, but in her mind, tracing them over and over during her lessons, her meals, even in sleep. She began to notice small things, birds that flew in perfect circles over the school's bell tower, shadows that didn't match their owners. And once, on the third Thursday, she caught her own reflection blinking when she didn't. The school's pulse, though invisible, was constant. Miss Kesh watched her from a distance, sometimes with worry, sometimes with awe, and then came the day Florence stopped responding to her name. It was subtle at first. Delays, hesitation, the way one might react to a name they once wore in a dream. Her drawings grew more elaborate, her eyes darker. She asked questions that no child should know how to form. Why is the chapel built over ribs? Who decides which 32? If I remember enough, will I become the book? Miss Kesh answered none of them. Could not. Her role had been etched long ago. She was no longer the writer, only the page. But the real fracture came when Florence found the basement. No maps showed it. No door led to it. But one day, while helping a younger student gather fallen pencils near the choir hall, Florence noticed a section of floor that sounded wrong. Hollow, soft. She tapped it, pried at it, and it lifted like paper soaked in rain. Beneath, a staircase spiraling downward into soil that breathed like lungs. She descended. She brought no light. She didn't need it. The walls glowed faintly with a pulse she recognized. Not light, not flame, but memory. And carved into the staircase, walls were names, thousands of them, each one scratched not with tools, but with fingers. At the bottom, the corridor ended at a door made entirely of mirrors, shards bound with tendon and copper thread. It opened for her. Inside the cradle, again, but this time it was empty. The Book of Veins sat beside it, closed and silent, as if awaiting permission. Florence approached it, laid a hand on its surface. It didn't resist. The pages flipped open not to text, but to a blank space shaped exactly like her. And on the opposite page, her name, written in reverse. Florence turned slowly. Miss Kesh stood in the doorway. She looked thinner now, barely able to stand, her limbs trembling with effort. "You're not ready," she whispered. "I am," Florence replied. "I always was. You don't know what it takes." "I don't need to," Florence said calmly. "I remember." Kesh took one step forward, then another, and then collapsed, her body folding like parchment. Her skin began to flake, not burn, dissolve. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. She reached toward Florence, but it was not for help. It was for release. Florence touched her fingertips gently, and Kesh vanished, nothing left but a thin silver thread that floated upward, then curled into the book's spine. 33 once more. The cycle now complete. Florence sat before the cradle, and the chapel, deep above, began to groan. Not in pain. In rebirth, the school's bones creaked into a new shape. Its bell rang backward, forward, and then together. Time folded. Light inverted. Briar Hollow blinked, and when it opened its eyes again, the children were different. The teacher had changed, but the door remained. It stood in the basement where the cradle had once rocked, where the Book of Veins still pulsed faintly beneath layers of folded time. No hinges, no handle, no visible frame, just a black outline etched into the stone itself, humming with a frequency too low for human hearing, too precise for silence, and Florence Guide, now not Florence at all, sat before it. The ink had accepted her. The school had shaped her. The cycle had completed, but unlike Anna before her, Florence had written only part of the new order. She had left blank pages between the lines. Not out of rebellion, but intention. She wanted space. Space for remembering. Space for breach. Up above, life continued. Children arrived. Parents wept joyfully at the gates, kissed foreheads, handed off futures they would never fully recover. And the bell rang only once each morning. Still forward, still backward, still both. The townspeople aged. Their memories softened. None questioned why the school always remained full, why its teachers never seemed to leave, or why its history was always rewritten on the same page. Except one, Reverend Matthias Kane. Old, hunched, nearly forgotten, he had once taught scripture in the chapel when it bore pews instead of mirrors. He had buried too many to count, but he remembered Anna's voice. And one morning, after the third frost, he heard Florence Guide speak, and it wasn't her voice, it was Anna's. Not an impression, not imitation, the very same voice, same pitch, same pause between consonants, the same sorrowed inflection that hinted at truths no tongue should carry. He began to ask questions. He found no records, no burial logs, no town census older than 40 years. All paper above the school's threshold had been replaced. The ink always bled when he touched it. And then one night, while praying in the church alone, he felt something shift. The steeple bell rang thrice, unprompted, unprovoked. The floor beneath him pulsed. And in that moment, he remembered a girl with stitched lips mouthing his name from behind the chapel wall. He returned to the school. Old bones. Weak knees. Still, he climbed the stone steps, entered through the front, and made his way down. No one stopped him, not even Florence. She waited for him in the basement, alone, still as a statue. The door behind her flickering faintly now, like a wound trying to heal. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Until he whispered, "What are you?" Florence blinked once, then said, "I am the record." "And the others?" "They are the ink." "And the door?" She tilted her head. "That's the part I haven't written yet." Matthias fell to his knees, tears welled without understanding. "You remember?" he gasped. "I always did," she answered. "That's what makes me different." He stared at the door. "If you open it," Florence nodded, "we end. And if you don't, we repeat." He breathed in deep. A century of forgetting weighed behind every breath. "Do you want to open it?" Florence looked away. "I want to know what's beyond." She turned to the Book of Veins. Its cover no longer glowed, its pages no longer bled. It waited. She placed her hand on the spine, and for the first time in all the school's long, looping history, the 33rd child hesitated. She closed the book and stood. The door behind her flickered once more, and then went still. Florence faced Reverend Kane and said softly, "Not this time." He nodded, not in agreement, but in awe. Because as she walked past him, up the spiral stairs and into the morning fog, the school behind her breathed not in hunger, but in relief. And for the first time in 142 years, a child walked out the front gate, unafraid, remembering.